strategic partnerships with civic and cultural organizations across North America. And this year, the Photoville fence expands to 11 major parks and downtown areas across North America.
Great. So that just gives you a little idea of what it looks like here in Denver. And so thank you to those who maybe have just joined. So we're gonna get started. JP, do you want to talk first about your work, and then we'll jump in and Lindsay and Barbara can speak too?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I didn't know that we were right next to each other, guys, yeah, Barbara and Lindsay. I had no idea, so that's nice to see that. So my name is JP Terlizzi. I am from New York City. I actually live in North Jersey, right outside of the city. So the Good Dishes is my body of work, and well, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. So my background is in graphic design and advertising, and I've been photographing for about 10 years now. And most of my work is about family, it's about relationship, it's about identity, it's all personal. So yeah, I've been doing that for about 10 years. So the body of work that's in the fence is called the Good Dishes. And the body of work is about memory and loss, and it looks at the mode of family heirlooms and the role that they play in socializing over a meal. So for me, the series started, I come from a very large Italian family, and my godparents had passed away, and I was helping my cousins clean out their home. And my cousin turned to me, and as we were cleaning out my aunt's cupboard, she gave me my aunt's dishes, and she's like, "Why don't you do something creative with them?" So I took them home, and it was, I always wanted to play with still life. I never did still life before with photography. So it was something I wanted to play with and experiment with. So I, did a bunch of different, experiments with how to play with the dishes and so forth. And it wasn't until I think the dishes were sitting on my desk, and they were like, they were piled up, and I had just looked above them, and I thought it was like a very interesting way that they looked. I liked that it was very flat looking. So I actually took a really quick iPhone photo of it, and I liked what I saw. I was like, originally I was playing with it where it would sit on the table. It was like your traditional landscape. I mean, the traditional still lifes that you would see and like Renaissance paintings and stuff. And, but I liked the way that this looked. It was very flat looking. And so I started playing with that kind of setup. And it was actually when I started holding my aunt's dishes, it really brought me back to when I was a teenager and when I was a little kid, going over to my aunt's house for Christmas, or going, having them come over to our house for Thanksgiving. It really had a lot of really beautiful memories of being around the family table and hearing stories, not sharing for me, but hearing stories of my aunts and my uncles when they were younger. And so it brought back a lot of good memories. So, in my family, food was like this association with love. Whenever I would visit my aunts and uncles, the first thing out of their mouth would be like, sit down and have something to eat. Let me make you something to eat. So there was always this association with food and love. So holding my aunt's dishes brought me back to, my teenage years, and I had like these really special memories. And I remember distinctly like sitting around Thanksgiving and Christmas, table and dinner. And after the dinner was done, my aunts and my mom would always put on the table like this really big giant bowl of fruit and nuts. And everybody would be like picking at the fruit and picking at the nuts, and they would be just reminiscing and talking about stories. So that kind of like spurred the idea of using like fruits and vegetables with my still life, and working with the dishes and telling a story of memory and the special memories that I shared with my family. And then so my aunt, the oranges that are in the show are actually my godmother's dishes. That was the first still life that I did. And the background that you see that was used in that was actually wallpaper. So when I moved on to my second one, which was my aunt's tea set, there were lemons, and I researched, patterns for lemons, and I think like for like 2 weeks, and I could not find the exact same pattern for the lemons. So I have a graphic design background, and I'm like, you know what, this is really insane. You are spending so much time trying to find something that you can't get perfect. So why don't you design the patterns yourself? And that's what I did. So I started photographing pieces of the china and digitally manipulating it to make these large textiles. And I designed each of the individual patterns that are in the entire series for all of them. So it made this whole look of it very flat looking. And I like that. It would remind me of like a recipe book, and you know, my aunts and my mom and my grandmother, there were all these magnificent cooks. Like they made all this homemade, you know, Italian recipes, and a lot of the fruits and the vegetables that I used in the still lifes are from, you know, from my heritage and from my culture. You know, like peppers and radicchio and beans and artichoke. My aunts would make like these fabulous dishes with that, and so I had, you know, really nice, beautiful connotations of food and memory in relation to my family. So that's how the whole series started, and it went from there. So some of the dishes that are in the series are from my family, and then as I showed it to other people, especially my friends, they would give me, they would be like, oh, I have my grandmother's dishes, or I would have my mom's dishes. Would you photograph them? And I would photograph my friends' dishes, you know, from their family. And then I would show like my neighbors, and my neighbors would show me give me their dishes. So it kind of like, you know, grew from that. So yeah, it was a fun series to work on. I worked on this in 2019. And then when COVID hit, I revisited the series once again. It was just like a very nice, I don't know, it was just like a nice memory to revisit it, and getting to know my neighbors. I live in a very large apartment complex. So getting to know my neighbors and telling them what you do, you know, I tell them, you know, I do fine art on the side, and show them some of my work. And then they would show me their, you know, their parents' dishes or their grandmother's dishes. So I did like 6 more during COVID. So yeah, that's how it kind of like evolved and came to be.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm also just gonna give so everybody, if not everyone's familiar, this is the series. These are the particular images that are on the fence of JP's. Just
So the oranges are the first one. That was the first one I did. Those are my godmother's dishes. And that's how this whole thing started.
Fantastic. And then Barbara and Lindsay, do you want to talk about your work, and then we can kind of open it up and have more discussion?
Sure.
I'll show your work before we get started. So while I'm here.
Yeah, I also did I have some larger slides of those if you.
Perfect. Yeah, if you want to
do a share screen. Well, just a little background. Lindsay and I have been collaborating on photographic projects for over 4 decades. And we have, over the course of these many years, I think one of the things that we've been doing is examining and interrogating the idea of the domestic realm. And through that work, we've done many series, and somehow over the last 10, maybe 15 years, Linz, has it been, that we've ended up talking and working with food. And at first we did a series that was really about the physicality of food. Both of us raised children. And so there was this sticky feeding of always food everywhere, and sticky messy counters. And then we moved on and did a series about the sort of psychological and emotional energy that flows through the sharing of food, in a series called Ponder Food is Love, to JP's comment about food is love. And then when we came to the topic of junk food or processed food, we did a series called Processed Views, surveying the industrial landscape, that was recreating images of the American West by Carlton Watkins in processed foods. And that's the work we exhibited at the at CPAC in 2016. And it was in those moments, we had a wonderful panel when we were in Colorado with the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Group. And, you know, using food, it's such an accessible topic, and it gives people these points of entry. Meanwhile, as we often describe our work, it's like appealing and then appalling. So when it came to, so we did that project, and that really opened up the idea about what consumption is and consuming and consume. And in that case, it was looking at land use. And the work that's shown on the fence right now is from a series called Recipes for Disaster. And it is, it's climate change told through risk-laden desserts. And Lindsay, we actually, the impetus for this project came when we were in Colorado, and maybe you can talk about that, Lindsay.
Another, because Samantha's so communicative and open, you also suggested to the Center for Fine Art Photography that they have a show at their location when they had the space. And we went up there maybe a year later or so for that exhibition. And when we were up there, we're always, we love to go to these openings and make presentations and see the work in 3D. We had a day off that weekend. We were there, and we could have gone to Estes Park, but we ended up going to the feedlots in Greeley, Colorado, and just how, I'm talking about processed food. Well, let's see where they process things like cows. And it was kind of, well, an eye opener. And we just started playing around with the idea because it was so intense. And that was where we went in Greeley. That was a small scale compared to other parts of the country. So we were looking at aerial views, and we looked at the patches of these feedlots look kind of like brownies, and there it is. And then Barb, in her relentless internet quest, found little sprinkles that are like cows. And so somehow we just said, hey, it's like Recipe for Disaster. And that's where our idea was born. And we thought of other ways, and we're both very conscious of not only the food we put in our bodies, but how that is made. So we thought, well, there's so many climate change issues. How are we going to sort them out? So we thought if we presented them as recipes, everybody could have a little bite-sized vision of a problem, and it's much more comprehensible that way.
Linz, can you see this? Is my screen being shared?
I can see.
So these are our plates of brownies with these little, and the aerial views really did look like brownies.
Well, that looks like brown. Yeah, they look the same. It could be in there, but it's okay.
Shared screen.
So that started us on our way.
Trying to bring my shared screen to the front to move this. Okay, oops. So out of that, we ended up thinking about combining these recipes. Well, the impetus came, we put this work away for a while, and then under the Trump administration, we watched with horror as the many environmental regulations were being reversed. When the EPA website went down for a year, and when it was relaunched, the entire section on climate change was missing, was now buried deeply in the site. We started to think, well, if this information about climate change is getting expunged from the public record, maybe we should make a cookbook and preserve it somehow. So the images that are on the fence are recipe spreads from our Recipes for Disaster cookbook, which I'm not sure why that's happening. So this is one of them. This was in direct response to the idea that things were getting expunged from the public record. And so we made these desserts and started to,
The screen hasn't changed, Barb.
pardon me?
The screen has not changed.
No? Why can't I do that? How do I
My screen.
resume share? How about that? It says sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Does anyone know how I do that? Maybe here.
Maybe move the PDF to the,
Turn my,
Whoops.
let me get out of it. I'll escape out of it and I'll do it again. Being shared.
so now we see number 8.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So we did this cookbook using the, drawing heavily from the way that photography is used in representing food, particularly everyone's obsession with documenting their meals and the way it's become a vocabulary. So that was one of the spreads. So these are the 5 images that are on the fence. So the expunge cake. This is text from the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on the climate crisis, which was summarily dismissed. We went on to do Baked Alaska. So these are the recipes read. Lindsay, you want to read that recipe there?
I can't read it.
Ingredients: heat trapping gases from air pollution, starving polar bears, destroyed phytoplankton, beached whales. Preheat atmosphere with carbon dioxide emissions. Stir heat trapping gases into Arctic region. Thaw permafrost until lightly browned. Increase heat by reducing reflectivity. Add waters of sea ice, melting glaciers, and eroding ice shelves. Let sea levels rise. Ready when low-lying coastal areas across globe are submerged. And one of this was, here's our aftermath gingerbread. With increasingly severe storms heading your way, prepare your icing and gather your gumdrops. Spice-laden gingerbread, shored up with icing, is by far the most structurally sound recipe. With luck, some portions of your sweet home may survive floods, mudslides, and mountainside collapse. It was hard to do this work. That's all I could say. And we were trying to, as we're inundated with information about climate change, there's no end of data that is made available. And yet it's like some kind of meta idea. You don't know what carbon dioxide in the atmosphere looks like and what could happen if we were reducing it down to something that is supposed to bring us comfort. And in the realm of what desserts are, they're optional. They're not necessarily, they're the treat after the end of a fine meal. So the notion about, could this begin to lead people into the science about what was happening to the earth. So this is our rainforest flambe.
They're all on the website. Where
Extinction cookies, cream together endangered species and poachers, stir in illegal trade to make more dough, add generous portions of habitat destruction, dust liberally with encroaching populations available in black markets worldwide. So we wrote the recipes, you know, researching the facts, and we hoped that the format of the cookbook, it would just bring people in to start questioning some of the policies that we were and the climate crisis that we're facing.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Here's the cookbook. We did it in a spiral binding, and of course, so we can be continually adding disasters, which seem to be accruing at great speed. We're just working on some COVID cookies, but horrible. I mean, it was. I'm remembering now, it's been a while since we finished this work, but that how uncomfortable I was doing, approaching a subject so directly and head on like this, and obvious and punning and difficult.
I really like too in this work how, well, just thinking like bringing it back to kind of the fence and having those kind of categories for the different areas of the fence, and that, you know, things come into food or home. And so then in thinking about food, like how different each work is, you know, this looks pretty, or it's a beautiful image, but then when you start to get closer or read, you know, the text, the expunge cake or the rainforest flambe, you know, how then it really starts to settle in more that it isn't just this sweet dessert, that there's, you know, climate change and challenges associated with the images that you're producing.
Well, you know, it's interesting that, you know, getting more familiar with JP's work and the good dishes about what, you know, about presentation, about photography and presentation when it comes to, you know, there's something aspirational about recipe books. They always look far more perfect than you can ever create in your home. And what that, and, you know, JP, your work seems so, you know, there's a certain level of perfection in what the good dishes actually are. You know, you pull them out for company. Right. You don't use them every day. And the interesting way that plays with aspirational qualities in what food, you know, photography does for this too.
Yeah, and I think too, and to JP's work, you know, I was so intrigued when I learned more as well about the project before we showed it, and how detailed and how he was creating not only the compositions, but also the wallpaper. And so seeing those images at their full scale, you know, for so much to take in is really, there's so much detail in the whole image. So
yeah. And it was a lot. I mean, when you start, you know, it's just actually holding, you know, I was holding my aunt's dishes, and then you start having these memories. And I remember, you know, her taking out the tablecloths and the silverware. Everything was like so meticulously how they were placed on the table and had to be perfect, you know, so that it was, you know, because it was a special occasion. So it was a lot of good memories. So I think, you know, the images kind of reflect the same feeling of that it's, you know, these really constructed formal tablescapes that you would see on a dining room table.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that, I mean, what I love so much about the fence, and when it, you know, specifically in Denver, when we've installed it, and, you know, people, this is now the second year it's been in that location, and people are so excited to just be able to kind of come up to it. And in the year that we're in with the pandemic, to be able to have kind of more outdoor public art, I think is so fantastic. and Barbara and Lindsay, I'd seen your work, I'd get like a postcard. And so to see them larger, on the fence is really wonderful as well. Cause I hadn't seen the cookbook, but I'd get a postcard at the gallery and be like, oh yes. Oh my God, what is this about?
I was thinking about this story when I was, a friend of mine who grew up on a farm was telling me about how his mother used to grow green beans, and then she would jar them and preserve them. And then their cabinets would also have canned green beans, and that she would only bring out the good green beans for her special guests. And it's like, there's a hierarchy to food too, about what you'll serve, not only on the dishes, but the notion that you would, there are certain foods you would share with someone because those are the good green beans.
I have a question for JP about his work, because the initial vision of it is so beautiful. And every time I looked at him, you think a little more, you learn a little more about what the image is doing to you personally. I mean, to me. And I started seeing that they sort of looked like mandalas. And then after a while, they sort of took on this, when I read more about how they came to be, I thought about them as, they almost look like priestly vestments, like they're so formal. And so, and I thought, oh, that's that Catholicism coming out.
Exactly. Well, that's when they would come. That's when the dishes would come out. Is when the priest would come over for dinner.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, maybe that had something to do with it. But it was always, I would always remember, like, whenever those dishes would come out, like especially with my mom, the priest would be coming over for dinner, and the way we would have to behave at the table and the way we had to dress was a certain way, and your elbows can never be on the table, and you always had to say please and finish everything on your dish, so that you were putting this good impression to the priest that was coming over. So yeah, so maybe, subconsciously, yeah, that's I was thinking about that.
Well, it's so much about ritual, what you described. Yeah. And your other work about deer hunting too is another, manly ritual. And I thought that was a really interesting relationship, because they're both sacred rituals, the eating and the making of food. So I really enjoyed seeing that connection.
I was also, a few of the guests here tonight on the Zoom call are women who, when Lindsay and I, when we were in Chicago, we were involved in bringing Judy Chicago's dinner party to Chicago, and worked extensively on that. And I kept seeing JP's portraits, like these portraits of women, these sort of symbolic, because as Lindsay said, they kind of present as these mandalas or some, portraiture. And I was wondering to what extent you thought of them as portraits.
It's funny. I didn't think of them as portraits until recently, when I started looking at them and saying, yeah, the memories I would get of my aunts, their dishes, and the way things were placed. And I would do things subconsciously, the way dishes were placed on the tablescapes. So yeah, I definitely see this relationship of these self-portraits to my relatives.
Well, and even the food,
yeah, definitely the food,
symbolic foods that are coming.
Yeah.
I mean, do people, it's interesting, like when you're working with food as a topic, it has so many points of entry for people to enter into, it's such a memory trigger, everybody's got these associations with it. So it ends up, it's just interesting to work with it as a topic, because it seems like it allows people flights of their own memory to go into it. And I find that it's a potent topic because of that, because everyone comes with their own, everyone has to eat.
Right.
Well, I think too, their own to your point, Bart, like their understanding of what foods they maybe like or don't like or didn't have a good experience with eating maybe as a child, or I think about like Brussels sprouts having such a resurgence, like, and kids being like, I hated Brussels sprouts, but oh, now that I know how to cook them, like, just those like childhood memories of how we associate with food, or the memories that we have, or to your point, JP, as well, like the dishes, or when the kind of the nicer things are brought out for that family, or the priest coming, or the big family gathering. I think a lot about, I have my great grandmother's china, and we try to bring it out not just for holidays, but then it's like, oh God, it's a lot of work to like get it out, pull it out of the cabinet, a different cabinet. So, but that idea of what does that feel like, and how, and the memories that are tied to that. So.
Well, and right now, I mean, everyone's, when we were working on that book, I kept thinking, when we were working on the book, there weren't the terms like stress baking or quarantine cooking and this hunkering down in people's kitchens. They found themselves there again, facing this food preparation and comfort food and anxiety food and eating. So there's a new connotation with how people are finding themselves in the kitchen again, and what those relationships are, and why they're so comforting and disturbing and recalling.
Lindsay, how was the experience for you working on that project? I always like hearing both of your sides of that process of working together, but then your own experiences of how you feel about making the work.
Well, when we began that project with the feedlots, and then we moved on to the baked lab, we did a couple other ones. And we used the same format. We were using a view camera, and I just said, I'm not doing this anymore. It's like, it's this whole horrible project this project of a downer project, and there's a struggle we're trying to communicate this climate change issue, and it was just oppressive, and also this sort of lacking freedom to use that format. So when Barb said we put it away, we just it took so long, and it was, we had other things to do, but we started getting so many ideas that we lose a 35 millimeter. And that was a much better experience, because you'd get more enthusiastic about just the taking of the pictures and be more spontaneous. And once we had gone over that technical, we got much more enthusiastic about it. And then slowly we began to see that these really, how do you express what we're thinking about? And we started writing these, and Barb did a lot of research that made her grumpy for a while.
Still am.
It slowly evolved into, it was nothing more than, it wasn't going to be an exhibition. It was first in our mind a book format, and that was kind of liberating, because it's we had a very, it wasn't a clear idea of how we were going to do it, but we knew what we were going to do, and we just had to get every single disaster in there. So I remember Barb's, pasting it up, and no, we have to get that rainforest. So we got at the end rather more than at the beginning.
Nice.
And I was, oh, go ahead, JP, sorry.
I was going to ask, how did you guys meet?
We were students.
We went to
at-
school together.
went to school
Ah,
together. And we were in we went to the Institute of Design in Chicago. And at the time we started to do much more performative work where we were in our own, work. And if you know about the Institute of Design, the photographic legacy was this modernist vision and this sort of singular, I don't want to say ego driven, but perhaps more, identified with a certain photographer and a sort of signature style. And the fact that we were collaborating just drove people crazy. I mean, now it's common and it's encouraged to do that, but people would just say, well, whose picture is it? Well, and the idea that we were working together on this, that was one of the aspects that, and nothing like being told, you can't do that, to cement making sure you're going to do it and do it. But I wanted to ask JP about, and then we just kept going. We haven't run out of subject matter over 4 decades. We're still, what are we, interrogating these topics. But I wanted to, one of the things in doing these, in doing this cookbook is we started to plumb these 1950s cookbooks and then do these kind of collages over them. And in the doing of that, there was this examination about what nostalgia is and nostalgia for what. And I'm curious about JP's work too, about what the, I mean, when we were doing this, suddenly these notions about where the perfect, there were always the woman in the party dress with the 2 kids, and they were always white, and the dad was in the suit going to work, and you're starting, once again, this kind of 1950s version of the perfect family that never existed, or existed for a few people, maybe on the surface, but and what was this what feels like a retroactive desire to send us back to this time when this was allegedly the norm, and what and so I was curious about the role of nostalgia in your work, JP, and what
yeah, it's funny when I was working on the dishes, it would bring me back to Thanksgiving and Christmas time. My mom hosted Thanksgiving, so I would have we would have 20, 30 people at our house for Thanksgiving, and my aunt would host Christmas, and we would have 50 people at her house. So it was very interesting to see the roles that my aunts played in preparing the meal and serving the meal. They would make sure everyone would be seated at the table, and they would serve everybody. They would actually scoop the food on our dishes and make sure all my uncles were, and maybe this is like an Italian thing that they did, but it was interesting to see that. So working on the project brought back those kind of memories. And not that I agree with that, the women serving the family, but that was back then, that was the thing that they did. And especially in the Italian culture, that was, it was a pride that the woman cooked a meal and then she served it to the family, and that the family all ate it and stuff. And then she would go back and clean all the dishes, and my uncles and stuff would go in the living room and unbutton their pants and like fall asleep, so I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but it brought back those kind of memories of nostalgia and the family and some of the traditions that I grew up around. Not that I agree with it all, but there were I think about it, it's like it's happy memories. Now that all my relatives are gone, growing up as a kid, you know, it was a hassle always having to go there and, you know, go to my relatives. It's like, oh, we're going there again. And, but now that they're gone, you cherish those memories and you wish that you can, you know, you can go back and do it again. And just to hear those stories, it was great. It was great. But as a kid, you don't appreciate it. You know, you take advantage of that. So.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly.
Well, no correct answer. For me, the nostalgia, you know, I don't want to be the one doing the dishes after the 50.
Yeah, I like doing dishes. I don't cook, but I love doing dishes.
The point about nostalgia, I think, is that the point about nostalgia is that the dishes, the mess, the inconvenience, the insults that somehow happen, you know, the passive aggressive nature of all those family things get washed away, and you're left with like a vision, a memory, a happy dream, instead of a nightmare. Hopefully, that's with nostalgia anyway. So, and Barb, we used our childhood memories as a baseline, but you know, the nostalgia of our nostalgia is different from, you know, our own kids' nostalgia, or maybe Samantha's too. So that's what's so interesting, how they're weaving back and forth, but yet completely different.
And two, does anyone who's participating on, does anyone have any questions as well for the artists? Please feel free to unmute yourself or type one in the chat. I wanted to make sure I left time too if anyone had any specific questions, as the conversation's been great, but I just want to make sure.
I would like to see JP's photos again. It was just, we only saw it for a few seconds.
Yeah,
Can you show them again?
of course.
And could you describe it a little bit?
Can you move into that,
There we
Samantha?
go.
Like enlarge those a little?
Large, there we go.
Oh yeah, there, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Aren't these like, you know, they do look like the
Oh,
well, that one.
Yes. So like I said, all of these, you know, all of these dishes and the patterns that you see are all constructed so that it kind of blends in together. And that was all deliberate to do that. I love the idea that when you looked at this, it kind of looked like a recipe book that you would see when people are photographing recipes from up above. And I like that look to it. So it's interesting. Some of these dishes, like this one, goes back to the 1800s. This is from a China company called Spode, and there's a couple Spode China in the series. And it's interesting that some of these are still in production today. This goes back to the 1800s. And also with the food, when I was working with the food, I looked at ways of how I can deconstruct the food and then put it back together to make it look interesting, and also to bring your eyes goes on this journey from the top of the image to the bottom of the image, so it circles around. So this is like a real good example of that.
It's really lively.
Yeah, it brought back a lot of happy memories doing this. Especially this one. I mean, I adored my godmother, and you know, I never tackled still life before. This is the first one I did, and to have her dishes, you know, be the first one that I achieved the still life for is very special to me. So I have a big one of this in my house that I just love.
Great. Well, that's all of them that are on the fence, but there's many
there's
more.
like, yeah, I think there's like 34, 35 of them on my website.
You know, I've been lately, Lindsay and I have been researching like the history of recipes and what goes in, you know, the backgrounds and histories and have these we have one right here, you know, these wonderful little 3x5 boxes that contain recipes from family recipes and heirlooms. And so when I look at your work, JP, I'm always thinking about you know, the sort of people behind the scenes who are doing the cooking. And when I see these peels, it feels to me like, you know, someone's getting used up in like the blueberries are getting poured out. Now, this could, of course, just be me. I've been spending a lot of time with these little boxes that are starting to look like coffins to me. You know, just energetically what goes into the preparation of food and the presentation and what that is. You know, there's like a backstory to all of it. And so that just, so I have a completely different read when I look at those things, because it's like the peeled orange, you know, was once whole and now this peel. And so anyway, just a comment on how I've been reading it. But
And I'm also monitoring chat too. So Christos mentioned it's wonderful to see history integrated in modern photography with such a personal narrative. Yeah, I see a hand.
Well, I'm
Hope you're muted.
sorry. I bought Barbara and Lindsay's book to give to my grandson, who's very much interested in climate change. And I thought I really liked, I went to see the exhibit when it was at the Hyde Park Art Center. And that's when I found out it was going to be a book. And I think my grandson was a little shocked when I gave it to him I'm trying to remember if I gave it to him as a birthday present or as a high school graduation present. I also gave him a check, but in any case, he was just fascinated by it. And I like the idea of using common things to explain really complicated things, because I do think things like climate change and many of the other issues that we're facing these days are so overwhelming that it's really hard to understand them. And so I believe that the more we could tell the world and tell ordinary people about this in images that they understand, I'm hoping that people will get more invested in it. So I just want to thank Barbara and Lindsay for doing this book, because I think it's really important to get important messages out in various ways, and not just being, you know, talking heads that are going on, or articles that are, you know, your eyes roll after the 15th page or whatever. So I love the book. And I also like the fact that it's funny. I mean, it's sad funny, but it's whimsical, and it's another way of looking at things. So, and I think an important way, and I think we need as many ways to do this as possible. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions? That was a great question and comment. Well, with that, I feel like we've had a wonderful dialogue, and I know we are in multiple time zones, so I always try to be mindful of everyone's time, and it's a Thursday evening. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and we did record, so we will have it on our website. Probably sometime tomorrow we'll get it uploaded, but I can't thank JP and Barbara and Lindsay enough for joining and jumping in when I was like, let's have a Zoom and talk about food. So I appreciate all of you and sharing and talking more about your projects, because I think they're both fantastic and really important, and it's really wonderful to hear more about them and how the way they make people feel. So
Thank you.
just thanks to Denver for being such visionaries and supporting photography in such wonderful ways. So thank you, Samantha.
All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight, and hope to see you at another Zoom at some point soon.
And as we always say, bon appetit.
Bon appetit.